Stay tuned for the Joan Quinn Profiles. Joan served the state of California as a member on the Arts Council and on the Film Commission. She was formerly on the Architectural Commission and fulfilled 2 terms on the Fine Arts Commission for the city of Beverly Hills. As an editor for Andy Warhol's Interview magazine, Condé Nast Publications, and the Hearst Corporation, Joan covered the world of fashion, the mysteries of food, the excitement of theater, and the international art scene. She continues to find people who are on the cutting edge of their professions. Here's Joan Agajanian Quinn.
Hi, I'm Joan Quinn, and welcome to the Joan Quinn Profiles. We're taping here at the Hollywood Museum on Highland Avenue in the heart of Hollywood, and it's the old Max Factor historic building. We have our guest today, filmmaker Delila Vallot, and author, music critic Scott Yanow. Filmmaker, dancer, actress, Delila Vallot was born and raised in Hollywood, not far from our studio here. She went to Cherimoya Elementary School, Bancroft Junior High, and the Los Angeles City High School for the Arts. How was it being a child in Hollywood? You were right close to the studio. I bet you had to be in films.
It did kind of just envelop me. I don't know who made the choice or how it happened, but I did just sort of end up in it.
And
yeah,
when did it
true.
start? When did it start?
I was 7 years old.
Oh.
And there was Al Fan's Ensemble, which is on Santa Monica Boulevard. And I started taking classes there.
Ah.
And then there was an agent, and they...
You mean at 7?
Yeah, and they signed me. And so I was like, you know, doing commercials and stuff like that when I was a kid.
Well, I think you do have to be born right here in the heart of Hollywood, right?
Yeah.
It's like Hollywood and Vine, Hollywood and Sunset, Hollywood and Hollywood Boulevard, Highland.
Yeah, I grew up on Beechwood.
So that's like just
It's
down
like,
the street, right?
Yeah, right in the mix.
So what really came first, Delila, acting or dancing?
It was acting, and then dance was a few years later because my mom used to work at Capitol Records.
Oh, which is
and,
just down the street too. We said Hollywood and Vine, right?
Yeah. And there was a little studio that's not there anymore. It was across the street from Capizio's, and it was Madame Etienne, who would like sort of beat you with a cane and like feed you cookies, and those were like the...
She was your dance teacher?
Yeah, my dance teacher. So
I remember they said Carmelita Malachi used to beat her students too with a cane.
Yeah, it was really old school. I mean, we were learning castanets and all kinds of stuff.
Don't you? Aren't you glad she beat you?
I'm totally glad. I mean, it wasn't. She actually never quite touched me with the cane. It was just more imposing.
And the idea, yeah.
And sometimes you'd get a cookie, and you know, so that's how the ballet started.
So then you worked with a lot of choreographers, right?
Yes.
And tell us who some of those were.
Jaime Rogers, who was one of the original guys in West Side Story on the Latin Gang.
Oh, yeah.
Debbie Allen, who is actress, choreographer, director.
Still working a lot.
Still.
Is Jaime working a lot, too?
You know, that I'm not sure of. I know that last time I worked for him was quite a while ago, and it was in Italy.
Oh, wow.
For a TV show there. A lot of people go abroad.
Right, but Debbie's here working in Hollywood, right?
Yes, which is great.
And who else? And
let's see, Alex Magno, who did Madonna's Girly Tour. Trying to think.
You know, the reason I'm asking is because choreographers have a name for themselves, and they all have a different kind of style. Did you notice it while you were?
For sure.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, and at the time, there was kind of a divide because Paula Abdul had just come out and got her style, which was very kind of fast and quick movements and really into the ground. And my training was really coming from a ballet. And work-wise, I could only do tall girl stuff or like the language stuff, so there'd be a lot of time in between jobs. But when I did get them, because in Hollywood there wasn't that kind of style going on so
That's
much.
interesting. That's interesting because you can, from a very floaty to a very choppy.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard. You know, when you've got long arms, you have the same amount of time to get from maybe here to here as someone who's smaller.
That's very.
And you've got to be even quicker. So I got like more of the kind of contemporary adage style jobs.
Did you ever do that in films?
I did. I was actually Tyra Banks' dance double in Coyote Ugly.
Oh, you
movie.
were? Oh,
yes.
you were?
Yes.
Oh, because you're tall and she's tall too.
Yeah, for a dancer, tall, not as tall as that beautiful, tall, languid woman, but for dance, yeah, I was pretty
But you're tall, and how tall are you?
I'm 5'8".
Yeah, you're very tall, aren't you,
Yeah.
for a dancer?
For a dancer, yeah. And I was in a movie called I'll Do Anything with Nick Nolte, and it was one of like the first musicals that came out before musicals sort of came back, and the producers took a big risk with that one. It was choreographed by Twyla Tharp, so I've worked with Twyla Tharp as well.
Twyla Tharp has such a great style too. Talking about
great.
style, right?
Yeah.
Did she direct you?
Well, she was the choreographer.
That's what I mean. Was
yeah.
she the,
Yeah, and it was amazing watching her work. And
she's still working. She does a lot of Broadway and a lot of stage things, doesn't she? Out of all of this, you're dancing, you're acting. In 2013, you got to direct your first feature.
yes.
What was that, and why did you become a director?
Well, the movie's called Tunnel Vision, and it's a super micro-budgeted suspense thriller that I shot with my ex-husband. We were already divorced at the time when we shot it, so that's not what broke us up.
So you knew it was professional. He
Oh,
was
yeah.
professionally good.
Yes. And I had, this whole time working on the other side of the camera, had picked up the camera and was shooting short films and sort of experimental stuff on my own, and reading about screenwriting and storytelling, because like you said at the beginning, you're just surrounded by your peers that are
Everything.
all doing that. And
Right.
I took an interest, and it was still photography, and he needed someone to direct that. So long story short, that's how it kind of worked out that way.
So that was great. And then from there, you went to this fantastic documentary, Can You Dig This, right?
Yes,
Was
yes.
that the next step?
That was the next step.
Was it a natural progression for you?
It was a natural progression in that there's a story that sort of leads up to how I ended up doing this particular doc.
So how did you get to this project? Is
well,
that the story?
That's part of the story. Yeah, it's because I said yes before I realized how hard it was to make a doc, because you're shooting real life and then you're kind of cutting the script after the fact. So it's taking
What they say is that there's a lot of stories that come out when you're shooting a doc, and the story that you started to tell changes a lot. Did that happen with you?
That's totally true. And you try to set up you have a thesis. I have this idea. I'm going to tell the story this way,
Right.
and then real life happens, and also you end up sort of living and getting to know people that, you know, we all live in our own little worlds. That is, if you're doing a fiction piece, you can still go back to your home or your hotel
Right.
and turn everything off. But with a doc, you've really got to open up in order for other people to
You
open
stayed
up.
in the middle of it, I
Yeah,
guess. Well, where was it? Tell us where it took place. Where was the location?
Can You Dig This takes place in South Central Los Angeles. So we've got
What streets?
Long Beach Boulevard is where the Compton Community Garden is.
Oh, it's Long Beach, so Compton, Long Beach.
Yeah, very, very close. And then
Were you afraid to go into that area?
at certain times, yes.
Because, you know, you're saying you have to live the doc. You have to be in the middle of it. So you can't say, go shoot this, and here's what I want you to say, ask.
Exactly.
You had to be there.
Yeah, and I mean, sometimes it would be like, if even in Hollywood, you know, running around with a $14,000 piece of equipment with one eye covered. With this eye closed this one. So you're holding this equipment as a woman by yourself on any city street, no matter where you are. You can't see behind yourself always.
You're like open to what's going to happen.
And I have
you had
headphones on to be the sound person, and so I can't really hear anything but who I'm interviewing. So it kind of puts you in this vulnerable.
So you were photographing, you were asking questions, you were shooting.
Yes, which I think I'm looking at a lot of docs now to figure out what their process was, and I feel like that's semi-normal, that you have to kind of you have to listen and check your sound and you know, keep
And what
it in
about
focus.
light and focus?
Well, luckily, I shot on the C300, and that camera works really well in low light, so
Oh,
I
so it
didn't have
doesn't.
to work too hard on lighting.
But then you got these really interesting people involved in it. Did they? John Legend came in to co-produce. Is that what he's doing?
John Legend and Get Lifted are the executive producers of
How did
the
you
doc.
get them in? Before, after, during, what?
He took a look at what we were doing sort of mid-cut, and they were crazy about the idea and doing something positive for the community. And
This is Hollywood. So, did you know someone who knew him? Did you know him? Because you have to get it to the person, and you can't get it to the people who are going to the person.
that's true.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
You have to have a real connection, because the people to the people don't usually come through.
That's true. That is very true.
And someone came through for you.
Yes, that's true. I worked with Delila Films, which is Raphael Mormor and Christopher Leggett, which are two amazing producers, just really great, down-to-earth guys that do know a lot of people, and they're producing all day long and going out all the time to meet people. And
So they had to come to you and approve your project, right? Or you went to them to get them?
well, we actually all knew one another, and I have the sort of backstory with Can You Dig This, how that started, and it was sort of this kind of organic thing that happened, how Can You Dig This arrived in our laps. But they asked me, did I want to do the doc, and that's when I said yes, before I knew what was entailed.
Oh, so they wanted you. Well, tell us, Can You Dig This? I mean, it sounds like a rap song or something else, and it's such a great title for a garden.
Yes. You know what? We had, what's the title? We had something, Far From Eden. We had this very ethereal title initially.
Can You Dig This is so perfect, because you think of digging, and when you look at the doc, you're digging and you're making things grow.
Yes. And we actually, someone gave us that title. We were in mad search before we were coming out for like a better title, and some, I don't know his name, I wish I did, to give him credit, but he's like sort of old school Hollywood guy that helped us figure it out.
How long did it take you to make the doc?
I think it was like, by now, I think it was like 2.5 years.
So your characters changed. One character was the gardener. Who was that?
Well, there's Ron Finley, who's
Right.
the gangster gardener.
The gangster gardener. And he goes to jail during the time?
He was in threat of going to jail for planting, carrots in the ground.
Was that the
as he puts
problem?
it? Yeah, and the big kind of picture issue that I gleaned from shooting this movie is that we have this problem in South Los Angeles, or just in Los Angeles, but there's places all over the U.S. where it's actually illegal to plant vegetables where the grass is. And that just seems so
You mean
antiquated.
instead of having on your lawn, you can't plant vegetables?
Right. Like, you can breathe the air, you can drink the water, but you can't plant those vegetables, watch out.
But you met a lot of vegetarians talking about vegetables, right?
Yeah.
Were you a vegetarian too?
I am a vegetarian, but I'm surrounded by meat eaters who also love to plant. I wish that I would have been able to incorporate some people with chickens as well, because that's kind of part of the
I know.
urban gardening movement.
There's so much to talk about, and it's such a great film, and you count so much, and it brings the community together.
Yeah, that's very true.
People sit around, they talk,
Yeah.
they have opinions. It's like the barber shop, actually.
Exactly. It does bring community together.
You've got it all going. You have it all going, everything that you just mentioned. And I think the idea of growing things where things were dying is what this is all about.
I like that.
And thank you for being here, Delila.
Thank you. It's so nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Don't go away. We'll be right back with music critic Scott Yanow. Hi, I'm Joan Quinn, and welcome back to the Joan Quinn Profiles. We're taping here at the Hollywood Museum on Highland Avenue in the heart of Hollywood. And this is the historic old Max Factor building. My guest is Scott Yanow, who has been a jazz journalist and historian for over 40 years. He graduated from Cal State Northridge with a degree in accounting and was the jazz editor of Record Review and the senior editor for the All Music Guide for Jazz. And he's written hundreds of CD liners, as well as a number of books on music and musicians. Scott, when you left New York as a young boy and you came to Los Angeles, did you know anything about jazz?
Not really. I had seen the movie called The Five Pennies, which was a great Danny Kaye movie where he played a Dixieland trumpeter.
Ah.
But other than that, I really didn't know anything about jazz. But I kind of discovered it when I was 16. I noticed in the Los Angeles Times that there was a mention of a radio show that was actually on from 5 to 6 p.m. Monday through Friday, which is something I can't imagine being true today. But
just jazz, was it?
Well, it's Dixieland, basically. And I said, oh, that's happy music. I guess I'll give that a listen. And, well, within a week, I was completely addicted. And I haven't been bored since.
It took over your life? It took over your life?
Well, my life may not be a great action-adventure movie, but it certainly has the world's best soundtrack.
So from a degree in accounting, excuse me, maybe in acting, did you do any acting at all?
Well, actually, I was. A year or two ago, I was in a movie called Snowman, but it was just playing a clarinetist, just sitting. I didn't have any lines, but I did get to play on the soundtrack.
But you did. Do you play the clarinet? Mm-hmm. And you play another instrument too?
Oh yeah, well I play tenor sax, and I also play a little keyboard called the melodica.
But then we're not calling you a musician. We're calling you a historian and a journalist.
Well, I'm not a professional, but I do have fun in playing it.
Oh, you don't. Oh, you're not a professional. Okay, so. From accounting, a degree in accounting, where did your first job happen? Was it in accounting, or did it turn out to be in jazz and journalism?
Well, I started in accounting, and I was always very good with numbers, so that's why I thought, well, accounting would be a good field. But within a short period of time, I realized that it's much more fun to write about jazz and hear all these great records than just to add numbers all day long. I used to tell people that my job was adding up numbers and throwing away paper.
And throwing away paper.
Well, that was true at the time, anyway.
How did you get to start writing for CD liners? And what is that? What is a CD liner? Does every CD have something like that?
Well, that was true actually in the LP days too.
On the big.
Mm-hmm. There'll be notes on the back of the record, for people to read, just giving background about the recording and about the artist. And it's the same thing in CDs. If you open up a CD, there's usually a few pages inside.
And then how do you research that?
Well, it's just a matter of knowing it, really. And also, I interview a lot of artists, so I find out the background of the story behind it.
In that way.
See, so when I started, the way I really started writing about jazz is I had a friend who was going to start a magazine called Record Review.
Oh.
And he thought, oh, this would be a good idea. Maybe we want to have a magazine be a third classical, a third jazz, and a third rock, and cover all kinds of music.
Third Rock?
Mm-hmm.
You named a TV show, Third Rock.
Oh, that's true. But what happened with the magazine, though, is the classical section eventually dropped out, and the rock section became heavy metal, basically. So it's the world's only heavy metal and jazz magazine.
But so you just really concentrate on jazz. Mm-hmm. And tell us what jazz is.
Well, people have been debating that for 100 years now. But
I know, so you tell us what you think it is.
Well, the thing that distinguishes jazz from other kinds of music is that there's a lot of improvisation, where people are on stage, they make up the music as they go along, they express themselves in the music. Because if you see a pop group and you're familiar with their most recent record and you see them live, they're probably doing something very similar. But in jazz, they might be doing the same repertoire, but the solos would be different, the playing would be different, maybe the tempo,
How do you write then? How do you write jazz if someone's going to do improv on it?
Well, you're giving them a framework, really. If they're doing more standard jazz, then it's based on a song, and they're following the chord changes and the melody. If it's a freer form of jazz, then they use that as a departure, but at least that's usually how they begin the song and sometimes how they end it.
But is all jazz like that? I mean, there's very many categories that fit into that. Mm-hmm. And tell us what fits into that box, and then what you specialize in.
Oh, well, there's all kinds of jazz, really, and actually I listen to every era and every style. So, I mean, was fortunate that I started off with New Orleans jazz and Dixieland, so I really kind of started at the beginning, and then
On
swing.
that, let's stop on that. Is there improv on that kind of?
Yes.
Oh,
Oh, yes.
there is. Dixieland and.
Well, I mean, you could tell what song they're playing, and the melody pops up quite often while they're playing it. But on the other hand, they are throwing in a lot of subtleties, and you hear a clarinet solo, it's different each time usually.
I see. And then what else is within that framework?
Well, that was in the early days, and jazz, because it has some of the most creative musicians in the world, it continues to evolve through the years. So it went through swing and bebop and cool jazz, which was based in LA, and
What was cool jazz?
well, it's based on chords, and it has a softer sound basically to it, a quieter rhythm section.
And who specializes in that?
Well, people from the past like Jerry Mulligan, Dave Brubeck,
The cool.
Chet
Those
Baker,
were the cool. Those were.
Stan
the-
Getz, people like that.
yeah.
But it was really at its height in the 50s.
What was it? The Lighthouse and at
Yes,
the beach.
exactly. Yeah, they used to have a group called the Lighthouse All-Stars that played there for probably 10 years on and off.
And those people that you just mentioned played there.
Oh, yes. And then jazz in the 60s, it evolved to the point where it was getting a lot freer. People like John Coltrane and Ornette Coleman, where they start with a song, but then they're improvising much more and a lot more emotional and.
More bluesy, would you say?
Well, sometimes, but also, they have freedom to play whatever they want at a certain point.
I see.
And then there was fusion in the
That
70s.
was the 60s. Okay, 70s fusion.
Yeah, which was a mixture of rock and jazz.
And who was?
It's like a group like Weather Report or Return to Forever or Chick Corea or Herbie Hancock, people like that.
Those are the people that are more well known, right? And then in the 80s?
Well, see, after that point in time, then it gets more confusing.
Oh,
As
good.
if that's not confusing enough. Right?
Good, right. But it's nice to pinpoint each one of these so that we know what you're talking about. So when it gets confused, why does it get confused?
Well, it's just that there isn't any dominant style since that point in time. Everyone basically creates their own music, and sometimes it's a historic music. Sometimes they might play bebop or swing, but sometimes they're coming up with original tunes and original conceptions. And it's sort of beyond styles, beyond descriptions.
We talked about some of those other styles. We didn't talk about bebop, who we would look for in bebop music.
Oh, well, the founders were Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie, and then early Miles Davis and Thelonious Monk.
Oh, that would all be counted that. And then the next thing that you talked about, we said bebop and...
Well, bebop became the foundation for what happened after the swing era. Then it was bebop. And
swing. Did we have swing?
Oh, yeah, that swing, well, music of the 30s and 40s, big bands, Benny Goodman, Count Basie.
So those are all counted in the jazz
Oh, yeah.
circuit.
Jazz is huge.
I see. I see.
So anything from Louis Armstrong to someone just playing complete free improvisation, it would be considered jazz, even though it might not seem to have a lot in common.
Well, I never thought that swing bands were jazz, but I see what you're saying now. The people who were conducting them, directing them.
Because there's solos and they are improvising.
I see.
Yeah, swing was a major part of jazz, really.
Very interesting because it's a long history. And I think we just look at it as music. And how do you differentiate? How do you make the public see that?
Well, you basically, my job as a reviewer would just be to give enough clues when I review a CD so the listener would have an idea what it might sound like and whether they would like it or not.
And then when you're reviewing something, are you sent out by an editor to review, or do you just go on your own? How do you get these assignments, and where do you place them?
Oh, well, it's basically freelancing. So I write for 5 magazines on a regular basis, including Downbeat and Jazz Is, and locally the Los Angeles jazz scene. And a lot of times I'm dealing with musicians directly, especially with liner notes, because there are not many large record labels anymore, and a lot of people put out their own music.
And the other thing is you write for a lot of shows. You've written for this live, what is it, Riverwalk or The Landing? What do you write for that?
Each assignment's different, really. It depends on what they need. A lot of times it's a biography of the artist who's
Oh, you
been
write
featured.
for the program?
In that case, I did.
I see. And then do you write a dialogue for somebody who's emceeing the show?
I actually did a couple of times on that show.
Did you?
We just have to see what their personalities are like and what, it's sort of like writing a screenplay. You try to figure out what the situation
That's what I
is.
was wondering. So,
Yeah.
because your journalistic career follows a big circle of things. You write for radio, you write liners, you write reviews, you play. Tell me a little bit about all the books, because you've written 12 books.
Well, it kind of started with the All Music Guide to Jazz, which was, I didn't write that the entire book, but the third edition I wrote about 7,000 or 8,000 reviews.
Oh, wow.
You know, the recording reviews. We tried to review everything that was available at the time. It wasn't everything, but we came close.
And then, as a reviewer, you're in a group called the Jazz Scribes, which I think is a great name. Who's in that group?
Oh, well, the Jazz Scribes, you know, the way that came about is it's kind of the fun idea that's been mentioned many times. You know, why? Since critics, a lot of critics and jazz journalists play music for the fun of it.
Right.
You know, why not put together a group and have musicians critique the critics?
That's a very good one. So
They haven't yet, but
so Richard Yanow.
Well, in this group, I have Richard Yanow is on keyboards. I'm on saxophone, clarinet, and melodica, which is a 2-octave keyboard, and also. Scott Galloway is the drummer, and
right.
Buddy Sampson is the leader. He plays electric bass.
And who directs it? Who put this all together?
Well, Buddy put it together, and you know, information about it can be found under his name on Facebook. But we're going to be playing. We've played 3 or 4 different gigs so far, and we're going to be playing a benefit soon.
Where do you rehearse?
Well, sometimes my place. There's a rehearsal studio near where Buddy lives, so a couple places.
And how do you get everybody together? Because you're all, you know, in and out of town and different places.
It's tricky.
Is it
a lot of
tricky?
phone calls.
A lot.
A lot of phone calls and emails.
And then who does it all? Who's the leader, would you say?
Oh, well, Buddy's the leader. He's the founder of it. And
I see.
He's come up with the engagements, and we all, it's a democracy, but he's really the leader.
So you play at different places around town?
Yeah, we have played several.
And what do you play? Because you have somebody who's classical, but what...
Oh, yeah, well, Richard Yanow, he's a classical reviewer for the LA Times, although he also writes about jazz. Scott Galloway writes about R&B, but he also writes about jazz. And Buddy has a magazine online called Scoop LA, and he's coming from the funk level, but he also listens to jazz. So we intersect, and I just stick to jazz myself.
You just stick to it. Before we leave, do you have a big collection of CDs or LPs or whatever, do you?
Of course, thousands and thousands.
And all by?
Well, they're all in jazz. They're all from jazz people, and it's alphabetical order. So I like to think I could find any record in 10 seconds.
Are you still?
But it is difficult.
Are you still buying things?
Yeah, I go to used record stores, and Amoeba close by is a great place. Let me mention really quickly, just to finish the Jazz Scribes, the benefit we're playing is for the Children's Hospital of Los Angeles.
I'm so glad that you were with us today, Scott. Thank you very much for coming.
Sure, thank you for having us.
And thank you for watching the show, and keep writing to JAQUINN1 at AOL.com. See you next time.